Is that you, Rebecca? Hello everyone, and welcome to day 27 of Terrorthon Ghoulish games. Somehow we've made it all the way to day 27 without ever discussing video games. I don't know how we've done it, but here we are. So, of course, I don't want to highlight some of the more obvious games like the mainline Resident Evil or Silent Hill games. They've got their own videos. But I want to highlight some lesser known ones. A couple of them I'm sure you'll have heard of, but I'd just like to highlight some of the more obscure ones to give you a more complete history of horror games. So let's start with Sweet Home, which came out in 1989 on the Famicom. Published by Capcom, it was an RPG game set in a mansion with an emphasis on inventory management, puzzles and survival. Does this sound familiar? The story was told through cutscenes and files scattered around this mansion. Does this also sound familiar? And this was one of the first games to ever use QuickTime events, and as you've probably already gathered, this laid the groundwork for survival horror as a whole, and especially Resident Evil. Then in 1993 we had a little game called Zombies Ate My Neighbours. A lot of you are familiar with this game, I'm very familiar with it. It's a top-down shooter wherein you rescue your neighbours using a variety of wacky weapons from pretty much every monster you can name. Creature from the Black Lagoon, zombies, vampires, werewolves, they're all here. This is one of the best games of all time to play in 2-player, and I highly recommend it if you haven't. It just recently got re-released too, so you have no excuse. Go get Zombies Ate My Neighbours played. Now we've got Clock Tower. Now this originally came out in 1995, published by Capcom, but it became a series, with the fourth and final game coming out in 2002. They are point and click adventure games wherein you generally escape and hide from the enemies rather than fighting them. Usually the enemy is a little man called the Scissor Man, and he's pretty damn creepy to be fair. Your character can enter what's called panic mode when they're startled, which makes them much harder to control. A very unique mechanic. It sounds very annoying too. It was succeeded by a game called Haunting Ground in 2004, I think. Then we got Parasite Eve, which came out in 1998, published by Square. Sort of a cross between the gameplay of Final Fantasy and Resident Evil. You controlled an NYPD rookie called Ea Bria, who was trying to stop a woman called Eve from destroying the human race through spontaneous combustion. The soundtrack was composed by Yoko Shimomura, who also did the Kingdom Hearts games and some of the Street Fighter songs too. It got 2 sequels. The first one was well received, but the second one had mixed reviews. Next up is System Shock 2, published by Irrational Games in 1999. It was an action RPG survival horror. That's a lot of genres. You try to stem the outbreak of a genetic infection devastating the spaceship you're currently on, and the villain of this game, Shodan, is iconic even to this day. She's a creepy bitch. The game was critically acclaimed, but unfortunately the studio went bust, and then the Bioshock series was born from it. Next up is a little known survival horror series called Siren. The first one came out in 2003 by Japan Studio, that was their name. The unique mechanic in this is you could sight jack enemies and see through their eyes, and you could use that to solve puzzles. You can't kill the Shibito enemies, so you're encouraged to hide from them instead. It's a very creepy game, and I recommend it. It received mostly positive reviews. It got a sequel in February 2006 and a reimagining in 2008 on the PlayStation 3. Next up we have a very famous one, Plants vs Zombies, released in 2009 by PopCap. It's a tower defense game, very family friendly, lots of fun, very nostalgic. It's spawned an entire franchise now, and it's one of the best soundtracks of all time by Laura Shigihara. She's absolutely phenomenal, and I recommend checking out her YouTube channel while you're at it. Then finally we've got a little game called Deadly Premonition, released by Access Games in 2010. This game holds the Guinness World Record for the most critically polarising survival horror game. It's based heavily on Twin Peaks and stars Francis York Morgan trying to solve the murder of an 18-year-old. The sequel came out in 2020 on the Switch of all things. I personally couldn't get that into this game, but you might, so yeah, by all means, give it a spin. And there we go, a small selection of ghoulish games which you might not have heard of before, but I recommend all of them to some extent. See you tomorrow.